Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the reincarnation of Iguro Obanai and had serpent breathing and kabaramaru. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, to Izuku Midoriya, was a symphony of details others missed. It was the subtle shift of weight in a person's stance before they moved, the almost imperceptible tremor in a voice that betrayed a lie, the change in air pressure that heralded an approaching object. Most people navigated life through a blurry filter of assumptions and generalizations. Izuku saw the sharp, brutal edges of reality, and it was a lonely existence. His solitude was personified by the constant, living weight draped over his shoulders. Kabaramaru, a pristine white snake with eyes like crimson jewels, was as much a part of him as his own limbs. The snake's presence was the most overt aspect of his registered quirk, officially labeled serpentine. The quirk file at the National Registry was insultingly brief: minor physiological mutation granting enhanced flexibility, and a symbiotic bond with a reptilian companion. To the world, it was a package deal of oddities. He was the quiet, creepy snake boy with the mismatched eyes, one a bright, piercing turquoise, the other a startling, reptilian yellow. At 14, Izuku had long since learned that creepy and weak were often interchangeable in the court of public opinion. In a world of explosive power and flashy abilities, his gifts were subtle, internal. His wiry, slender frame didn't scream hero, and his quirk offered no obvious offensive capabilities. So, he was relegated to the background, an oddity to be whispered about, a target for those who needed a whetstone to sharpen their own egos. The end-of-day bell shrieked through Aldera Junior High, a sound of liberation for most. For Izuku, it was merely a transition from one form of quiet observation to another. He methodically packed his bag, his movements fluid and precise. Kabaramaru shifted on his shoulders, his head rising slightly, tongue flicking out to taste the air. He was agitated. Izuku didn't need to ask why. The source of the agitation was striding towards his desk, smelling of burnt sugar and ozone. Katsuki Bakugo. Still scribbling in that creepy notebook, Deku? Bakugo sneered, slamming a hand down on Izuku's desk. The wood groaned under the percussive impact. A few lingering students paused, sensing the familiar prelude to a one-sided confrontation. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't yelp or stutter or cower. The time for that had passed years ago, replaced by a cold, weary stillness that seemed to infuriate Bakugo more than any fear ever could. He slowly lifted his head, his heterochromatic gaze meeting Bakugo's fiery red one. "It's for analysis, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice quiet but clear, devoid of the tremor it once held. "It helps me understand things." "Understand what? How to be a bigger loser?" Bakugo snatched the notebook. "Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. He read aloud with mocking grandeur. "You've gotta be kidding me. You still have that stupid dream? You with your parlor trick quirk?" The other boys with Bakugo snickered. One of them pointed a trembling finger at Kabaramaru. "He's gonna sick his pet worm on you, Bakugo." Kabaramaru emitted a low, almost inaudible hiss, the sound vibrating through Izuku's collarbone. A warning. Izuku rested a hand gently on the snake's body, a silent command to remain calm. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. He was looking for the usual reaction, the tears welling up, the frantic apologies, the terrified pleading. He found none of it. Instead, he found Izuku's gaze sweeping over him, analytical and unnervingly detached. It was like being examined by a doctor, or perhaps an undertaker. "Your stance is off balance, Kaken," Izuku stated, his voice flat. The words hung in the air, so unexpected they short-circuited the entire scene. Bakugo blinked. "What did you say, you damn nerd?" "Your right foot," Izuku continued, his gaze flicking down and then back up. "You're putting too much weight on it. It's your dominant leg, so you favor it for launching your explosions. It makes you predictable. If an opponent were to target your left leg with a sweeping attack, your entire center of gravity would be compromised before you could even raise your hands." Silence. The snickering died. Bakugo's face, a mask of arrogant contempt a moment before, was now a canvas of stunned disbelief, rapidly being painted over with furious red. He wasn't being mocked. He was being critiqued by Deku. You! Bakugo's hands began to spark, tiny explosions popping in his palm. What the hell would you know about fighting? More than you think, Izuku replied, and for a moment the voice that spoke didn't feel entirely his own. It was sharper, colder, edged with the weariness of 1,000 real battles. Anger makes you sloppy. You rely on overwhelming power to end fights quickly, so you've never had to refine your technique. Your movements are too wide, too telegraphed. You leave yourself open with every swing. This was the part of himself Izuku didn't understand. These sharp, cutting words that surfaced unbidden, forged in a fire he couldn't remember. They felt as natural as breathing, yet as alien as a foreign language. He saw flaws, weaknesses, and inefficiencies in people with a clarity that was both a gift and a curse. To Iguro Obanai, it had been the key to survival. To Izuku Midoriya, it was just another reason people kept their distance. Bakugo's face was now purple with rage. The sheer audacity of the analysis, and the horrifying kernel of truth within it, had pushed him past the point of coherent thought. With a roar, he swung the notebook back and then hurled it out the open window. Maybe you'll learn your place if you take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a real quirk in your next life. The words were acid, meant to dissolve Izuku's very being. The other boys gasped, recognizing even they had crossed the line. But Izuku's expression didn't change. The cold stillness remained, but his eyes darkened. The yellow ones seemed to glow with an inner luminescence, a predator's glare. He slowly stood up, his 5'5" frame somehow casting a much larger shadow in the tense atmosphere. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. That was a pathetic thing to say, Kaken, Izuku said, the words laced with a contempt so profound it made Bakugo take an involuntary step back. To joke about death shows a profound ignorance of its reality. You are strong. But you are not wise. And until you are, you will never be a true hero. You're just a bully with a powerful weapon. Without another word, Izuku shouldered his bag and walked out of the classroom, leaving Bakugo standing there, trembling not with victory, but with a confusing, terrifying mix of fury and something that felt disturbingly like fear. He had looked into Deku's eyes and seen a stranger looking back, an old, tired soul who had weighed him and found him wanting. Izuku retrieved his scorched and waterlogged notebook from the koi pond. The pages were ruined, the ink bleeding into incoherent blue-black clouds. He clutched it to his chest, a dull ache settling deep in his bones. It wasn't the notebook. It was the crushing weight of the life he was living, a life that felt like an ill-fitting costume. He was supposed to be kind, heroic, and optimistic. That's who Izuku Midoriya wanted to be. He admired All Might with a purity that was the one truly untainted part of his heart. But that genuine admiration was constantly at war with the cynical, mistrustful specter that lived behind his eyes. A part of him that scoffed at flashy heroics, that saw the world as a nest of vipers where only the most cunning and ruthless survived. As he walked home, the familiar dread began to pool in his stomach. He knew sleep would bring no rest. It would only bring the dreams. They had been with him for as long as he could remember, far more vivid and terrifying than any childhood nightmare. They weren't dreams of monsters under the bed. They were fragmented memories of a life steeped in blood and shadow. The first and most persistent dream was of the cage. He was small, his limbs weak. The world was nothing but dark, splintered wood, a lattice of bars that let in only slivers of moonlight. The air was thick, cloying with the smell of expensive, sweet incense, and something else, something coppery and metallic that coated the back of his throat. Blood, the smell of old blood, so much of it that it had soaked into the very wood of his prison. In the dream, he wasn't alone. A presence moved in the darkness outside his cage, vast and heavy. The sound of it was a grotesque slithering, like a colossal snake dragging its bulk across wooden floorboards. And then there was the voice, a sibilant, feminine hiss that promised him feasts and riches if he would only grow fat and plump. He would see a face in the gloom, a woman's beautiful face from the nose up, but with a mouth split wide from ear to ear, a Glasgow smile filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. Her lower body was the coiled mass of a giant serpent. He always woke from that dream with a silent scream lodged in his throat, his body drenched in cold sweat, the phantom smell of incense and gore filling his nostrils. Kabaramaru would be coiled tightly around his arm, squeezing with a reassuring pressure, his own small form trembling in sympathetic terror. Then there were the other flashes, less a narrative and more a sensory assault. The feeling of bandages tied across his mouth, a comfort and a shield. The weight of a unique, undulating sword in his hand, a weapon that felt more like a part of his own spine. The roar of battle, the clash of steel, the screams of things that were not human. He saw faces in these flashes, too. A man with a wild mane of golden hair and a smile as bright as the sun. A stoic young man with a half-and-half haori, water flowing from his blade. A towering, gentle giant who wept as he prayed. They felt like family, like comrades, their presence a balm of shared purpose in a sea of violence. But there was one dream, one memory fragment, that was different. It was the only one that brought peace. It was always a feeling before it was an image. A warmth in his chest, a sense of rightness, of a missing piece of his soul clicking into place. Then the image would bleed into his consciousness, a girl. She was smiling, a blush on her cheeks, her eyes a vibrant lime green. Her hair was the most striking thing about her, long and thick, braided down her back, the color of cherry blossoms fading into fresh spring leaves. She was often eating, usually sakuramachi, and laughing a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. In the dream, he never spoke to her. He only watched, a fierce, protective ache in his heart so powerful it was a physical sensation. He felt an overwhelming urge to clear a path for her, to slay any demon that would dare cast a shadow on her smile, to build a world worthy of her light. The longing was an ocean, vast and deep, and he would wake from that dream with a single, inexplicable tear tracing a path down his cheek. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she was even real. But the feeling she evoked was the only anchor he had in the storm of his fragmented past. She was the promise of a dawn he had never seen. He took the long way home, through a series of narrow back alleys and underpasses, seeking the quiet solitude of forgotten spaces. He needed time to let the echoes of the confrontation with Bakugo fade, to push the cynical voice back into its box. As he passed beneath a dark, graffiti-strewn overpass, a low growl cut through the evening air. Izuku froze. Kabaramaru's head shot up, his body going rigid around Izuku's neck. At the far end of the tunnel, silhouetted against the fading light, was a dog. It was a large stray, a mongrel of indeterminate breed with ribs showing through a mangy, dirt-caked coat. Its lips were curled back, revealing yellow teeth, and a line of drool dripped from its jowls. Its eyes held the desperate, feral gleam of a cornered animal. Izuku immediately began to back away, his movements slow and deliberate. He knew not to show fear, not to make any sudden moves. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice soft. The dog didn't respond to the placating tone. It took a step forward, then another, its growl deepening into a chesty rumble. It saw not a boy, but a threat and obstacle. Izuku's back hit the cold concrete wall of the underpass. He was trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. His heart hammered against his ribs. The dog lowered its head, its muscles bunching as it prepared to spring. This was it. There were no heroes here. No one was coming to save him. His eyes darted around, searching for anything, a weapon, an escape. His gaze fell on a length of rusty metal pipe lying amongst the refuse on the ground. Without a second thought, he lunged for it, his hand closing around the cold, gritty steel. It was heavy, awkward. The dog took his sudden movement as an act of aggression and charged, a guttural bark ripping from its throat. Time seemed to slow down. The world narrowed to the space between him and the attacking animal. The panic in Izuku's mind vanished, replaced by an unnerving, absolute calm. The cynical, cold part of his soul, the part that had analyzed Bakugo with such brutal efficiency, took control. Threat assessment, single opponent, moderate speed, high aggression. Objective, incapacitate or deter. Weapon, 1 meter of steel pipe, per balance, high impact potential. But then, something else happened. Something deeper. A current of energy, hot and electric, surged from the base of his spine, flowing through his veins like lightning. His grip on the pipe changed. His knuckles weren't white with fear, but firm with purpose. His stance shifted, his feet moving on their own into a low, coiled position he had never learned. He began to breathe. It wasn't the shallow, panicked gasp of a scared teenager. It was a deep, rhythmic, controlled intake and exhalation of air, a pattern as instinctive and ancient as the tides. He could feel the oxygen flooding his muscles, sharpening his senses to a razor's edge. The world became a tapestry of hyper-detailed information. He could see the twitch of every muscle in the dog's body, predict the arc of its leap, feel the subtle displacement of air as it closed the distance. The dog lunged, and Izuku's body moved. It wasn't a clumsy, desperate swing. It was a dance. He didn't step back. He flowed to the side, his body bending at an impossible angle, his spine as flexible as a willow branch. The pipe in his hand was no longer a blunt instrument. It was an extension of his will, a thong of steel. He brought the pipe around not in a straight arc, but in a twisting, undulating path that perfectly mimicked the movement of a striking serpent. It coiled through the air, impossibly fast, a blur of rusted metal. First form, winding serpent slash. The name echoed in his mind, a whisper from a forgotten life. The flat side of the pipe connected with the ground directly in front of the dog's paws with a deafening clang. The impact sent a shower of gravel and dust into the animal's face. It was not a strike meant to harm, but a perfect, precise act of intimidation. The sheer speed and alien nature of the movement, the terrifying sound, the unexpected sting of the debris. It shattered the dog's aggressive charge. The animal yelped, a sound of pure shock and terror, and scrambled backward. It tucked its tail between its legs, whimpered once, and then bolted, disappearing into the labyrinth of alleyways. Silence descended upon the underpass. Izuku was left standing in the center of the tunnel, his arms still extended, the pipe held in a perfect swordsman's grip. He was breathing heavily, but not from exertion. His lungs burned with the strange, powerful rhythm he had just used. His muscles hummed with a latent energy that was utterly foreign. He slowly lowered the pipe, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. He stared at his hands, turning them over and over as if they belonged to someone else. What was that? How had he done that? He had never been in a fight in his life. He had never held a weapon. Yet his body had moved with the practiced, lethal grace of a seasoned warrior. Winding serpent slash. The name felt right on his tongue, a perfect description of the impossible motion he had just performed. It was a key, and it had just unlocked a door in his mind, revealing a room he never knew existed. He dropped the pipe. It clattered to the ground, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. He stumbled back against the wall, sliding down to a sitting position, his mind reeling. Kabaramaru, who had remained preternaturally still throughout the encounter, now uncoiled slightly and nudged his cheek with his head, a gesture of comfort. Izuku looked at his small, white companion. The snake's red eyes seemed to hold a deep, ancient wisdom. Had he known? Had this power been sleeping inside him all along, waiting for a moment of true, life-or-death pressure to awaken? His quirk. Serpentine. The government file was a joke. A mockery of the truth. It wasn't just enhanced flexibility. It wasn't just having a snake for a friend. It was this. This breathing. This swordsmanship. This lethal, instinctual combat style that was etched into his very DNA. The pieces began to click into place, forming a terrifying, exhilarating mosaic. The dreams of the cage and the demon were not just nightmares. They were the source of his trauma. The flashes of battle were not figments of his imagination. They were training sessions. The girl with the pink and green hair, she wasn't a fantasy. She was the reason he had fought. The reason he had lived. A fire ignited in his chest, a stark contrast to the cold analysis that usually dominated his thoughts. It was a spark of furious determination. He was not weak. He was not useless. He was not Deku. He had a legacy. A power that the quirk-obsessed world had completely overlooked. He got to his feet, his legs still trembling slightly. He picked up his waterlogged notebook, a new resolve hardening his mismatched eyes. The notes on All Might and Endeavor were important, but they were about other people's power. He needed to understand his own. That night sleep did not come. He sat at his desk, a fresh notebook open before him. The first page was not titled Hero Analysis. It was titled Serpent Breathing. He wrote down everything he could remember about the sensation. The specific rhythm of the breath, the way it felt like it was supercharging his blood. He drew diagrams of the stance, the grip, the impossible, coiling arc of the attack. His hand moved with a certainty he rarely felt, sketching the form with an artist's precision. As the moon climbed high in the sky, he felt a restless energy thrumming just beneath his skin. His small bedroom felt like a cage. He needed to move, to test this newfound power, to see if it was a fluke. Quietly, he slipped out of his apartment. He made his way to the one place in the city he knew he would be utterly alone, the illegal dump site at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The mounds of trash, piled high like man-made mountains, offered perfect cover. He found a secluded spot, the salty air thick with the smell of rust and decay. He picked up a long, sturdy piece of rebar, its weight and length a crude approximation of a sword. He closed his eyes, trying to find that same state of calm, that same rhythmic breathing. It was harder without the adrenaline, without the immediate threat. His mind was too loud, filled with questions and doubts. Was it real? Can I do it again? Kabaramaru squeezed his shoulder. A gentle, steady pressure. A reminder. Focus. Breathe. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath and let it out slowly. He let the sounds of the city fade away, focusing only on the whisper of the waves and the feel of the rebar in his hands. He fell into the rhythm. Inhale. Exhale. He felt the familiar heat begin to build in his core, the electric current spreading through his limbs. He opened his eyes. The world seemed sharper, the moonlight painting the trash heaps in stark silver and black. He shifted his feet, and his body fell into the coiled stance from the underpass. It felt right. Natural. He raised the rebar, and without conscious thought, he began to move. He flowed through the first form, the winding serpent slash. The rebar cut through the air, its movement a perfect, undulating wave. It was slower than before, less precise, but the fundamental pattern was there. A thrill shot through him. It was real. He practiced it again and again, the movements growing smoother, faster, more confident with each repetition. He felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. This was who he was. Not just Izuku Midoriya, the quirk analysis nerd. Not just the creepy snake boy. He was this. A warrior. A swordsman. As he pushed himself, a new memory surfaced, another form locked away in his muscle memory. His body twisted, launching him forward in a blindingly fast, straight-line thrust, the tip of the rebar aimed at a discarded washing machine. The movement was different, direct, piercing, like fangs sinking into flesh. Second form, venom fangs of the narrow head. The rebar struck the washing machine with a loud pang, leaving a deep dent in the rusted metal. Izuku stumbled back, the recoil jarring his arm. The form was incomplete, raw, but it was there. A second piece of the puzzle. He stood there for a long time, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his brow despite the cool night air. A wide, genuine smile spread across his face, the first one he had felt in years. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated purpose. The world had called him useless. His classmates had called him a freak. Bakugo had told him to give up. They were all wrong. His quirk wasn't a party trick. It was a weapon. A legacy. An echo of a life spent fighting demons in the dark. And in a world that was about to be filled with new kinds of demons, he would be ready. The serpent of Muzidafu was finally beginning to uncoil. The days following Izuku's awakening at Dagoba Beach were a study in duality. By day, he was Izuku Midoriya, a quiet and observant student at Aldera Junior High, his presence a near nonentity to his classmates. But by night, and in every stolen moment in between, he was the inheritor of a forgotten legacy. The rusty length of rebar became his constant companion, hidden in an old golf bag he'd salvaged. His hero analysis notebooks took on a new, far more dangerous dimension. He was no longer just chronicling quirks and ultimate moves. He was deconstructing them. The cold, analytical part of his soul, Iguro's soul, now saw everything through the lens of a predator. He would watch clips of heroes in action online, and instead of fanboyish glee, a stream of critical commentary would flow from his pen. Empty lady, gigantification quirk. Massive power, massive target. Slow and clumsy. Center of gravity is a glaring weakness. A low, fast opponent could sever her Achilles tendon before she could even react. Over-reliant on her size, Kamui Wood's arbor quirk. Versatile for capture and mobility, but severely limited by environment. Highly flammable. His ultimate move, the lacquered chain prison, creates a cage. A cage. He would stop there, his hand trembling, the phantom sensation of splintered wood, and the smell of blood filling his senses. The trauma was a wellspring for the cold analysis, but it was also a poison that tainted everything. He saw cages everywhere. His study of All Might was the most conflicted. Izuku's heart still swelled with awe at the symbol of peace, at his unwavering smile and his overwhelming power. But Iguro's mind saw something else. It saw the sheer, unfiltered force and the shocking lack of refinement. All Might, quirk unknown, likely a strength enhancer of unparalleled magnitude. Fights with pure brute force. His punches create wind pressure that causes immense collateral damage. He telegraphs his name smashes. The wind-up is a clear tell. He meets every threat head-on, a valid strategy when you are indestructible, but a foolish one for anyone else. He doesn't dodge. He doesn't weave, he simply endures. Is it confidence, or is it a weakness born from a lack of true equals? The thought felt blasphemous, a betrayal of his lifelong idol. Yet, it was undeniably true. The part of him that knew the lethal dance of serpent breathing, a style built on evasion, precision, and exploiting the smallest opening, found All Might's style to be terrifyingly crude. His own training was a frustrating, exhilarating endeavor. He practiced his breathing relentlessly, striving for the state of total concentration he'd read about in historical texts on swordsmanship, a state he instinctively knew was the key to his power. The burn in his lungs was a constant companion, a fire he was learning to control. He could now hold the breathing for several minutes at a time, and the effect was staggering. His senses sharpened, his stamina increased, and his body, already flexible, became preternaturally agile. He worked on the two forms he had unlocked. The first form, winding serpent slash, was becoming more fluid, a dance of evasive offense. The second form, venom fangs of the narrow head, was a direct, piercing strike he struggled to control, the raw aggression of it feeling alien to Izuku's gentle nature. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that there were more forms locked away in his muscle memory, waiting for the right trigger. He was walking home from another grueling, self-imposed training session at the beach, the rebar heavy in its bag, when the world caught fire. An explosion ripped through the shopping district ahead of him, a concussive boom that rattled the windows of nearby buildings. Black smoke billowed into the sky. People screamed, a chaotic symphony of terror. They ran away from the danger, a tide of humanity flowing against him. But Izuku, drawn by some morbid, heroic curiosity, pushed forward. He squeezed through the growing crowd of onlookers, his small frame an advantage. He heard snippets of conversation. A villain attack! He's got a hostage! It's that sludge guy from this morning. Izuku's blood ran cold. He remembered the news report. A villain with a fluid body, difficult to contain. He finally broke through to the front of the police line and saw the scene. It was chaos. A monstrous being of green, viscous sludge was rampaging in the narrow street, its body amorphous and terrifying. It had two huge, manic eyes and a grotesque, grinning mouth, and trapped within its suffocating embrace, struggling and thrashing, was a figure Izuku knew with sickening familiarity. The spiky blonde hair, the telltale explosions popping from his hands, it was Katsuki Bakugo. The scene was a tactical nightmare. The street was narrow, limiting maneuverability and increasing the risk of collateral damage. Bakugo's uncontrolled explosions were setting fire to the surrounding storefronts, filling the air with thick, acrid smoke. Several pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were utterly ineffective. Death Arms was trying to land a punch, but his fists just sank uselessly into the sludge. Kamui Woods was nearby, but couldn't act for fear of the spreading flames. Backdraft, the fire hose hero, was relegated to damage control, trying to contain the inferno Bakugo was inadvertently creating. They were a disorganized mess of power, each acting individually, none of them working together. It was in that moment that the world shifted for Izuku. The panic chatter of the crowd, the frantic shouts of the heroes, the roaring flames, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The boy named Izuku Midoriya, the nervous, analytical Fanba, receded. In his place, something else surfaced. Something ancient, cold, and forged in the crucible of 100 life-or-death battles. The soul of Iguro Obanai, the serpent Hashira, looked out through those mismatched eyes and assessed the battlefield. Threat: amorphous sludge villain. High capture capability, low physical defense. Weaknesses? The body is fluid, but the eyes and teeth are solid. They are the only viable targets. Hostage: volatile. His quirk is both a liability and an asset. The explosions prevent the villain from fully suffocating him but are also causing chaos and obscuring vision. He is the villain's shield. Heroes: incompetent. Their quirks are ill-suited for the situation. They lack a coordinated strategy. They are waiting for someone with the right quirk to show up. A fatal hesitation. His gaze swept the crowd, sharp and discerning. And then he saw him. Leaning against a lamppost at the edge of the crowd was a skeletal, almost cadaverous man with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. He was clutching his side, a pained expression on his face. Most people would have overlooked him, another civilian frozen in fear. But Izuku saw more. He saw the tension in the man's frame, the way his eyes tracked the fight with a professional's intensity. He saw the ghost of impossible musculature under a baggy t-shirt. And as a plume of steam vented from the man's mouth in a choked cough, Izuku knew. It was all might. The realization hit him not with the force of a fan discovering a secret, but with the cold, dawning horror of a soldier realizing his commanding officer was wounded and combat ineffective. All might was here, but he was powerless. His time limit must have run out. No one was coming. The heroes on the scene were failing. Bakugo was going to die. A profound, chilling clarity settled over him. If no one else could act, then he had to. This wasn't the blind, desperate rush of a boy trying to save his friend. This was the cold, pragmatic decision of a warrior who saw only one, incredibly narrow path to victory. Hesitation meant death. And action was a death sentence. He dropped the golf bag, the heavy thud barely audible over the din. He didn't need the rebar. It was too unwieldy for this. His eyes scanned his person, his surroundings, cataloging his assets. School uniform, sturdy shoes, and a heavy yellow backpack, filled with textbooks and his ruined notebook. The plan formed in his mind with terrifying speed, a snake uncoiling for a strike. He didn't run through the police line. He slipped away from the crowd, down a side alley he knew from his countless walks home. His movements were silent, fluid. Kabaramaru, who had been a tense coil around his neck, now shifted, his head rising, his tongue flicking out constantly, tasting the air, sensing the heat, tracking the villain's movements through the smoke. He was a living sensory array, a partner in the hunt. Izuku's breath deepened, falling into the rhythmic pattern of total concentration breathing. The world snapped into high-definition focus. He could feel the burn in his lungs, the fire that supercharged his blood. He vaulted over a dumpster, his body moving with an inhuman flexibility that let him twist through the narrow gap between a wall and a drain pipe. He scaled the pipe with the speed of a lizard, his fingers and toes finding purchase in the smallest cracks. He emerged on a rooftop overlooking the scene. From this vantage point, he could see everything. The villain's shifting form. Bakugo's desperate, fading struggles. The hero's panicked indecision. The eyes, Iguro's voice whispered in his mind. The left one is more exposed when it taunts death arms. An opening of approximately 1.7 seconds. He needed a distraction and a weapon. He had both. He shrugged off his heavy backpack, swinging it once to feel its weight. It was perfect. He looked down into the alley below him. Lying amongst a pile of construction debris was a familiar shape, a length of rebar, about 2 feet long, rusted but solid. It was fate. Or perhaps, the world simply provided the tools a true warrior needed. He slid back down the pipe, snatched the rebar, and scaled the wall again in a matter of seconds. He now knelt at the edge of the roof, a predator overlooking its prey. Kabaramaru hissed, a soft, sharp sound next to his ear, his head pointed directly at the villain's left eye. Target acquired. Okay, Kaken, Izuku whispered to himself, his voice a low, steady hiss. Try not to blow me up. He stood. He took a deep, final breath, channeling every ounce of power his rudimentary breathing technique could provide. He began to spin, his body a whirlwind of motion, using the rotation to build up terrifying angular momentum. At the peak of his spin, he let the backpack fly. It soared through the smoke-filled air, a yellow projectile of doom, and struck the sludge villain squarely in the head, right between the eyes. The impact wasn't powerful enough to cause real damage, but that wasn't the point. The sheer surprise of it, an attack from a completely unexpected angle, made the villain recoil. Its grip on Bakugo loosened for a fraction of a second. More importantly, its massive left eye swiveled upwards in confusion, searching for the source of the attack. The 1.7-second opening. Izuku was already moving. He didn't just jump off the roof, he launched himself, his body coiling in midair. He fell into the chaos below, a descending serpent. He held the rebar in a two-handed, reverse grip, its sharpened, broken end pointing downwards. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw Bakugo's wide, terrified eyes meet his for a split second. He saw the villain's eye beginning to focus on him. He saw the heroes turning, their faces masks of shock. There was no time for finesse. No time for a winding slash. This had to be direct. A fang strike. His mind screamed the name of the form. Second form, venom fangs of the narrow head. He didn't shout it. He embodied it. He put all of his momentum, all of his breath, all of the desperate, vicious energy of a cornered snake into that one, single, piercing strike. His feet hit the sludge villain's shoulder, the fluid form offering just enough resistance for him to pivot. He drove the rebar forward. The sharpened metal point struck the villain's giant left eye with sickening precision. There was no blood. Instead, the gelatinous eyeball popped, like a water balloon filled with slime. The villain let out a gurgling, inhuman shriek of pain and rage. Its entire body convulsed violently, and its grip on Bakugo, for one critical, glorious second, completely vanished. Bakugo fell to the ground, gasping, coughing, pulling in desperate lungfuls of air. Izuku landed beside him, his stance low, the bent rebar still clutched in his hand. He placed himself between Bakugo and the wounded villain, his mismatched eyes burning with a cold, ancient fire. He had done it. He had created the opening. The crowd gasped. The heroes were stunned into immobility. But one person wasn't. A new voice, a voice that boomed with absolute power and authority, roared through the street. I really am pathetic. All Might, in his magnificent, muscle-bound form, was there. He must have seen Izuku's suicidal, brilliant charge as the catalyst he needed, forcing his broken body past its limits. Texas smash. All Might's fist slammed into the villain. The wind pressure was like a physical wall. Izuku grabbed the back of Bakugo's shirt and threw them both flat against the ground, shielding his friend's head as the hurricane washed over them. The sludge villain was atomized, splattered across the street and into the sky. And then, the heavens opened. The change in air pressure from All Might's punch had condensed the moisture in the air. It began to rain. The fires hissed and died. The chaos was over. In the aftermath, Izuku was suffocated. Not by a villain, but by heroes. Are you insane, kid? Death Arms yelled, his face inches from Izuku's. You could have been killed. That was the most reckless, idiotic thing I've ever seen, Kamui Woods chimed in. Vigilantism is a serious crime. You interfered with our work and endangered yourself and the hostage. They praised Bakugo for his powerful quirk and his tenacity. They scolded Izuku for his suicidal foolishness. Through it all, Izuku remained silent. His adrenaline was crashing, leaving him shaky and hollow. The cold, calculating Hashira was receding, leaving the 14-year-old boy to deal with the consequences. He looked over at Bakugo, who was being tended to by paramedics. Their eyes met. Bakugo's gaze wasn't filled with gratitude. It was a complex, churning storm of fury, humiliation, and utter, soul-shaking confusion. Izuku simply turned and walked away. He retrieved his backpack, ignoring the reporters who were now swarming the scene. He just wanted to go home. He wanted to sleep for a week. He didn't get far. DKU! He flinched, turning to see Bakugo stomping towards him, his face a mask of rage. I didn't need your help. I had it handled. Don't you ever look down on me like that again, you damn nerd! I don't owe you anything. Got it? Izuku just stared at him, his expression unreadable. With a final, frustrated roar, Bakugo turned and stalked off. That was quite the display of gratitude, a deep voice said from behind him. Izuku spun around. There, blocking the alleyway, stood All Might, back in his heroic form, though he seemed to be struggling to maintain it. All Might. Izuku breathed, the last vestiges of his fanbend nature surfacing. Walk with me, young man, the hero said, his smile looking strained. He led Izuku away from the main street, into the quiet back alleys where they could be alone. As soon as they were out of sight, a cloud of steam erupted from All Might's body, and he deflated back into the skeletal man from the crowd. He coughed, a racking sound, and a bit of blood flecked his lips. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. A bit of a showman's flair, he said with a grimace, gesturing to his shrunken form. He proceeded to tell Izuku the story of his injury, the fight 5 years ago that had cost him his stomach and limited his time as a hero. He showed him the wound, a terrifying, starburst-shaped scar that spoke of unimaginable agony. Izuku listened in horrified silence. The iguro part of him catalogued the injury, assessed its severity, and concluded that it was a miracle the man was even standing. The Izuku part of him felt a profound sorrow for his idol's suffering. Now All Might said, his blue eyes sharp and serious, his gaze pinning Izuku to the spot. Let's talk about you. I was there. I saw the whole thing. The way you analyzed the situation. The way you moved. That wasn't just a desperate, heroic charge, was it? Izuku swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. I don't know what you mean, don't you? All Might took a step closer. I've been a hero for a long time, kid. I've seen people with speed quirks, agility quirks, analysis quirks. I have never seen anything like what you just did. The way you scaled that wall, the way you threw that bag to create a blind spot, the precision of that final strike. That wasn't the frantic action of a civilian. That was the cold efficiency of a trained warrior. Of an assassin. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and damning. Izuku flinched as if struck. No! I want to be a hero! I want to save people. I believe you, All Might said, his voice softening slightly. Your eyes, when you stood over your friend, they were the eyes of a protector. But your methods, they are something else entirely. So I'll ask you again. Where did you learn to fight like that? Izuku looked down, his fists clenching. How could he explain it? I think I'm the reincarnation of an ancient demon slayer from a bygone era? He would be locked up. It's my quirk, he mumbled, the half-truth feeling like ash in his mouth. It's called serpentine. It makes me flexible. The other stuff. I don't know. It's just instinct. All Might was silent for a long time, studying him with an intensity that felt like it was peeling back the layers of his soul. He saw the conflict in the boy, the genuine desire to do good warring with a chillingly pragmatic core. He saw the potential, a blade that could be either a surgeon's scalpel or a killer's dagger. You know, All Might said finally, for years I've been searching for a successor. Someone to inherit my power. A quirk called One for All. Izuku's eyes widened. I was going to offer it to you, All Might continued, and Izuku's heart stopped. Your heroic spirit today, your willingness to act when all the pros were frozen, you proved you have the heart of a true hero. But now I'm not so sure. The hope that had flared in Izuku's chest was extinguished, leaving a cold, familiar ache. Of course. He was too weird. Too creepy. Too dangerous. I don't think you need One for All, All Might said, and the world tilted on its axis. In fact, I think giving it to you would be a colossal mistake. It would be like trying to paint over a masterpiece. That instinct you have, that unique power that flows through you, it's something special. Something raw. One for All would just smother it. You are not meant to be a sledgehammer, my boy. You are meant to be a rapier. Izuku looked up, stunned into silence. However, All Might leaned in, his expression deadly serious. That instinct of yours is untamed. It is dangerous. Today you struck the villain's eye to create an opening. What if you had been facing a human opponent? A villain with a solid body? Would your instinct have driven you to go for their throat? To sever their spine? The questions were brutal, and Izuku had no answer. He didn't know what Iguro's soul was capable of. You have the spirit of a hero, but the technique of a killer, All Might stated plainly. And that is a terrifyingly dangerous combination, but it is also a combination that, if honed correctly, could create a hero unlike any the world has ever seen. One who can move through the shadows. One who can end a fight with a single, precise touch. One who can succeed where brute force fails. He stood up straight, his skeletal frame seeming to regain some of its former glory. I am not going to offer you my quirk, young Midoriya. I am going to offer you something far more valuable. My mentorship. Let me teach you. Let me help you harness that terrifying power inside you. Let me teach you how to be a hero, not just a warrior. Let me help you temper that steel in your soul, so it can be used to protect, not just to destroy. The offer was overwhelming. Izuku's mind reeled. The cynical, distrustful soul of Iguro screamed at him. Trust no one. Power is to be taken, not given. This man is a fool, all smiles and bright colors. He knows nothing of the dark. But the hopeful, determined heart of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had dreamed of being a hero his entire life, saw the truth in All Might's words. He knew the darkness within himself. He was afraid of it. He didn't want to be a killer. He wanted to be the kind of person who could make the girl with the pink and green hair smile. He looked up at the greatest hero in the world, who was offering not a shortcut to power, but a long, difficult road to understanding. With a deep, shuddering breath, a decision made between two warring souls, Izuku Midoriya gave his answer. Okay. The 10 months that followed Izuku's fateful encounter with the sludge villain were a crucible that forged him anew. His life was now governed by a disciplined, almost monastic routine. Before the sun even dreamed of rising, he was at Dagoba Beach, the salt-laced air filling his lungs as he began his breathing exercises. The rhythmic hiss of his controlled exhalations was a counterpoint to the gentle murmur of the waves. His mentorship with Toshinori Yagi, the man behind All Might, was unlike anything he could have ever imagined. It was a constant, grueling tug-of-war between two opposing philosophies of power. The goal is to save, young Midoriya, not to win, Toshinori would say, his voice thin but firm as he observed Izuku practicing his forms against a backdrop of rusted cars and forgotten appliances. A hero's first priority is the preservation of life, including the villain's. Izuku, his body coiled low to the ground, would pause, the steel-reinforced Bakken in his hand feeling unnaturally still. The training sword had been a surprising gift from his father, Hisashi, who was working on a long-term geological survey project overseas. A note had accompanied it. Your mother told me you've taken an interest in conditioning. This was my old kendo Bakken. A strong body houses a strong mind. Make me proud. It was heavier than a standard wooden sword, with a core of dense, weighted steel that gave it a formidable impact. It felt right, but that's inefficient. Izuku would counter, the voice that emerged a blend of his own youthful tenor and Iguro's cold pragmatism. A threat neutralized is a life saved. The fastest way to neutralize a threat is to remove its ability to fight. A broken limb, a severed tendon, these are acceptable casualties to prevent greater harm. Toshinori would sigh, a weary sound from a man who had spent a lifetime punching problems until they stopped being problems. That is the logic of a soldier, not a hero. We operate under a different set of rules. Public trust is paramount. We cannot be seen as brutes. You must learn restraint. You must learn to de-escalate. This was the core of their struggle. All Might, a being of overwhelming power, had to teach restraint to a boy whose own power was built on lethal precision. Their training sessions were less about physical conditioning and more about ethical reprogramming. Toshinori would present him with scenarios, complex hostage situations or villains with delicate quirks, forcing Izuku to think beyond the simple, brutal calculus of combat. The physical training was relentless all the same. Toshinori, following the advice of a Spartan training regimen he called his American Dream Plan, had Izuku clean the entire beach. But it wasn't about building bulk. For Izuku, hauling refrigerators and engine blocks was an exercise in control. He had to use his breathing, his inhuman flexibility, and his precise understanding of leverage to move the impossible. He grew stronger, not in the explosive way of a weightlifter, but in the tensile, wiry way of a coiled snake. Every muscle became a finely tuned cord of steel, capable of contracting and expanding with breathtaking speed. He was unlocking more of himself. The first two forms of serpent breathing were now second nature, extensions of his will. But sometimes, in the heat of a complex maneuver, his body would move in a new way, a brief, tantalizing glimpse of a forgotten form. A twisting leap that felt like it should have been followed by a decapitating spin. A defensive pattern that seemed designed to flow around a storm of claws and fangs. He catalogued each fragment, each whisper from his past life, in a new, coded notebook that he kept under a loose floorboard in his room. By the morning of the UA entrance exam, Izuku Midoriya was a different person. The boy who had flinched at his own shadow 10 months prior was gone. In his place stood a young man of quiet, unnerving confidence. His frame was still slender, but it held a coiled energy that was palpable. His posture was perfect, his gaze sharp and analytical. The stutter that had plagued him for years had vanished, replaced by a deliberate, thoughtful cadence. Kabaramaru was a familiar white mantle over his shoulders, his crimson eyes surveying the world with the same intensity as his master's. He carried the reinforced bakken in a simple black kendo bag slung over his back. It drew more than a few stares as he stood before the colossal gates of UA High School. Other examinees buzzed with nervous energy, showing off sparks or flexing mutated limbs. They were a flock of peacocks, displaying their colorful quirks. Izuku was a viper in the grass, silent, still, and watching everything. The written portion of the exam was laughably easy. His mind, honed by Iguro's analytical prowess and his own meticulous study habits, dissected the questions with surgical precision. He finished with nearly half the time remaining, spending the rest in a light meditative state, regulating his breathing and calming his mind for the trial to come. Then came the orientation in the auditorium. The pro-hero present mic was a sensory assault. His booming voice, his flamboyant personality. It was grating to the part of Izuku's soul that craved quiet and order. He endured it with a placid expression, filtering out the noise and focusing on the core information. Battle Center Gamma. Foe villains. 3 types, varying point values. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with dark blue hair and glasses shot to his feet, his hand chopping the air with rigid formality. Sir! On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error for Japan's top hero academy to make. He then turned, his arms swiveling with military precision to point directly at Izuku. And you, with the heterochromia, you have been muttering and hissing to yourself this entire orientation. It is deeply distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. A ripple of snickers went through the crowd. All eyes were on Izuku. The old Izuku would have imploded, turning beet red and stammering out 1,000 apologies. The new Izuku simply met the boy's intense gaze, his mismatched eyes unblinking. I was practicing my breathing, Izuku stated, his voice calm and level, carrying easily through the sudden quiet. It helps me focus. My apologies if the sound of me oxygenating my blood was a distraction from the man shouting at us through a microphone. The response was so dry, so utterly devoid of malice yet so pointedly critical, that it stunned the accuser into silence. A few of the examinees who had snickered now coughed to hide their laughter. Present Mike, after a moment of blinking, yelled, "All right, listen up, examinee 7111, thanks for the sharp eyes. The 4th villain is a 0-pointer. Think of it as a gimmick, an obstacle to avoid. Now, can I get a plus ultra?" As the auditorium weakly echoed the school motto, Izuku closed his eyes. The boy with the glasses, Tenya Ida, he recalled from his brief analysis, was rigid, dogmatic, and loud. But his intentions were pure. He was a piece on the board to be noted, but not a threat. The real test was about to begin. The gates to Battle Center Gamma were immense, a solid wall of steel that separated the hopefuls from their dreams. Izuku stood amongst the throng, his hand resting on the hilt of his bakken. He could feel the thrum of energy around him, the nervous sweat, the crackle of quirks being barely restrained. He ignored it all. He closed his eyes, and the world went quiet. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. The rhythm of his breathing deepened, became a slow, powerful furnace inside his chest. Total concentration. The air itself seemed to grow thicker, richer with information. He could feel the subtle vibrations in the ground, the minute shifts in air pressure, the scent of ozone and hot metal already emanating from beyond the gates. Kabaramaru adjusted his position, his body becoming a tense, living weapon, perfectly in sync with Izuku's own readiness. Gah! Present Mix's voice screamed from a distant tower. There was a moment of confused silence. What are you waiting for? There's no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go! The dam broke. The other examinees surged forward in a chaotic, screaming wave. But Izuku did not run with them. He remained perfectly still for a single, critical second, his eyes snapping open. The turquoise and yellow orbs scanned the cityscape before him, not as a collection of buildings, but as a three-dimensional battle space. He noted alleyways, rooftops, choke points, and potential ambush sites. Then he moved. He didn't run. He flowed. He pushed off the balls of his feet, his body staying low to the ground, a green and black blur weaving through the initial choke point at the gate. While others were still trying to find their first target, Izuku was already deep inside the city. A one-point robot, a squat, scorpion-like machine, swiveled on its treads and charged at him, its weak laser cannons firing wildly. Izuku didn't even break stride. He slid towards it, his body tilting at an angle that defied gravity, the laser blast searing the air where his head had been a millisecond before. His bakken was a blur in his hand. It wasn't a clumsy swing. It was a precise, surgical strike. First form, winding serpent slash. The reinforced wood connected with the robot's leg joint with a sharp crack. The attack didn't destroy the leg. It shattered the axle pin holding the treads in place. The robot's left side seized up, and its own forward momentum sent it spinning helplessly into a wall, where it short-circuited with a pathetic fizzle. No destruction points. The thought barely registered. That method of takedown was simply the most efficient. Why waste energy destroying the entire chassis when a single, well-placed strike could achieve the same result? He moved on, a ghost in the urban jungle. A two-pointer, a bipedal machine with heavy armor, rounded a corner. It raised its Gatling gun arms. Izuku was already moving, running straight up the wall of an adjacent building for 3 steps before kicking off, twisting in the air. He landed silently on the robot's shoulders, his legs clamping around its head. Before its targeting sensors could even register his position, he had slammed the pommel of his bakken into the emergency access panel at the base of its neck. The panel popped open, revealing a mess of wiring. A single, precise slash severed the main power cable. The robot froze, its lights dying, and collapsed into a silent, inert heap. Still no destruction points. A small flicker of concern entered his mind, but it was quickly suppressed. The mission was to pass. The most logical way to pass was to score points, but his instincts, the ancient warrior's soul that now guided his blade, refused to engage in wanton destruction. It was sloppy. It was wasteful. He began to see other students struggling. A girl with purple hair that she could extend like ropes was being overwhelmed by 3 one-pointers. She had ensnared one, but the other 2 were closing in. Izuku appeared as if from nowhere. 2 fluid, serpentine slashes, and both robots were disabled, their weapon arms severed at the shoulder joints. He gave the girl a brief nod and vanished into the next alley before she could even thank him. A boy with a quirk that let him shoot sticky balls from his head had gotten himself trapped, his own projectiles pinning him to a wall as a massive 3-pointer bore down on him. Izuku didn't hesitate. He launched himself off a lamppost, his bakken whistling through the air. He didn't attack the robot directly. He struck the wall just above the boy's head, the force of the impact shattering the plaster and breaking the seal of the sticky balls. The boy fell to the ground, and Izuku landed between him and the robot, glaring at the machine. The 3-pointer was a different beast, its armor thick, its joints reinforced. Destroying it would take time and energy. Disabling it would be more difficult. Distract and escape, the cold voice of Iguro advised. He executed a feint, drawing the robot's attention, then used his incredible agility to lead it on a chase, weaving it through a narrow alleyway where its bulky frame became wedged between 2 buildings. He left it there, roaring in mechanical frustration. He was a phantom, a whisper of motion and a flash of black wood. He saved a dozen other examinees from their own mistakes. disabling the machines that had cornered them with an efficiency that was both breathtaking and terrifying. He was a sheepdog, herding the flock away from the wolves, but he was getting no credit for it. The destruction point counter on his wrist remained stubbornly, mockingly at 0. This isn't working, the Izuku part of his mind panicked. You're going to fail. You're not strong enough to destroy them head-on. Then we are not fighting the right way, the iguro part replied coolly. This is not a demon call. It is a test. We must adapt. But before he could formulate a new strategy, the ground began to tremble. It started as a low, deep rumble, vibrating up through the soles of his shoes. A collective gasp rose from the examinees scattered throughout the city. A shadow fell over the street, a moving eclipse that blotted out the sun. Izuku looked up, and his breath caught in his chest. Rising from behind the buildings, so colossal it seemed to break the laws of physics, was the zero-pointer. It was a mechanical titan, a Goliath of green metal and black wiring that towered over the tallest structures in the battle center. Its single, glowing red optic sensor swept across the cityscape, a malevolent eye of Sauron searching for insects to crush. The unspoken, unified response of every examinee was a single, primal instinct: run. The street filled with the sounds of panic screaming and stampeding feet. This was not a foe to be fought. It was a force of nature to be survived. Izuku's own pragmatic mind agreed. There were no points to be gained. Engaging it was illogical, a suicidal act of futility. He turned to join the retreat, his body already coiling to spring away, and then he heard it. It wasn't a scream for help. It was a small, pained cry. Ow! Izuku froze, his entire being locking up. He turned his head, his mismatched eyes scanning the chaos. And there, near the base of the advancing behemoth, he saw her. A girl with a brown, bob-cut hairstyle was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete, no doubt shaken loose by the robot's emergence. She was struggling, her face pale with fear and pain, as the zero-pointer's massive foot rose, preparing to take another city-block-sized step that would crush her into oblivion. Time stopped. The roaring of the robot, the screaming of the students, the frantic warnings blaring from the loudspeakers, it all faded into an irrelevant, distant hum. The world lost its color, its texture, its meaning. Everything became a washed-out, gray canvas, except for the girl. She was the only thing in focus. The only thing that was real. As the light caught her terrified face, a strange thing happened. Her simple brown hair seemed to shimmer with a phantom, rosy hue. Her wide, desperate eyes held a familiar light, a kindness he knew on a cellular level. And then came the scent. It wasn't the smell of concrete dust and hot metal. It was a scent that bloomed in his memory, a ghost on the wind, the sweet, nostalgic fragrance of wisteria and cherry blossoms. A memory, so vivid it felt like reality, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. A girl with pink and green braided hair, laughing, her cheeks dusted with a blush as she held up a piece of sakuramachi. A feeling of warmth, of peace, of a love so profound and absolute that it defined his entire existence. The vow he had heard in his dreams, now a deafening roar in his soul. If we are reborn, as human beings, in a peaceful world without demons, I will definitely tell you I love you. The image of the smiling girl from his past and the terrified girl in the present superimposed, their edges blurring until they became one and the same. They were two verses of the same eternal song. The cold, pragmatic soul of Iguro Obanai and the kind, heroic heart of Izuku Midori merged into a single, unified consciousness, driven by a singular, primal, and unassailable imperative. Protect her. The zero-pointer's foot began its descent. There was no thought. There was no plan. There was only instinct. The blood in Izuku's veins turned to fire. His lungs burned as he drew in a breath so deep it felt like he was inhaling the sky itself. Power, raw and untamed, flooded every cell of his being, a torrent of energy that his 10 months of training had only just begun to teach him to contain. He didn't run. He didn't charge. He became a tempest. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground as he crossed the distance, his speed an order of magnitude greater than anything he had displayed before. The Bakken in his hand felt as light as a feather and as strong as diamond. A new form, a new memory, uncoiled from the depths of his being. It wasn't a single strike. It was a continuous, flowing storm of motion, a technique designed to dismantle an opponent piece by piece with relentless, serpentine grace. Fifth form, slithering serpent. He did not shout the name. He became it. He leaped onto the robot's descending foot, his momentum carrying him upwards. He ran along the titanic leg, a tiny green blur against a mountain of metal. His Bakken became an extension of his will, a living fang that tasted steel. It wasn't a series of chops or slashes. It was a single, unbroken line of destruction. The reinforced wood, empowered by the sheer, focused force of his breathing and the velocity of his movement, sheared through metal like it was paper. He moved in a spiraling, undulating path up the robot's leg, his blade tracing a devastating path. He severed hydraulic lines, which erupted in sprays of hot fluid. He shattered reinforced joints, sending ball bearings flying like shrapnel. He cut through power conduits, which exploded in showers of blue sparks. The sound was not of impact, but of a high-pitched, agonizing scream of tearing metal, like a giant zipper being undone. He reached the hip joint, a mechanism the size of a small car, and launched himself off, twisting in the air. He landed on the robot's torso and continued his deadly ascent, his path weaving like a striking snake, his blade never stopping its song of destruction. He wasn't trying to break the armor. He was systematically dismantling the machine's skeletal and circulatory systems from the outside in. The zero-pointer, its entire right side catastrophically compromised, began to tilt. Its internal gyroscopes whined in protest, unable to compensate for the sudden, massive system failures. It began to fall, not forward onto the girl, but sideways, away from her, crashing into a row of empty buildings with a deafening, final groan of dying machinery. Izuku stood on the shoulder of the fallen giant, his chest heaving, steam venting from his lips in the cool air. The power that had surged through him was receding, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. He had just pushed his body far beyond its limits. He looked down. The girl, Ochako Uraraka, was staring up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror, awe, and something else, something strangely familiar. He leaped from the robot, landing as silently as a cat in a crouch in front of her. The primal, protective instinct was still burning in his chest. His mismatched eyes scanned her, checking for injuries, his expression a mask of fierce, feral intensity. "Are you hurt?" His voice was raspy, strained. She could only shake her head, speechless. Their eyes met, and for both of them, the world tilted. It was a jolt, a spark of psychic static that arced between them. In his gaze she saw not just a boy who had saved her, but a guardian, a protector whose intensity felt ancient and absolute. It was a look that said, "I would burn the world down to keep you safe." The feeling was terrifying and, inexplicably, comforting. In her eyes he saw the end of his long, lonely road. He saw the warmth, the kindness, the light that the soul of Iguro Obanai had yearned for across death itself. The fierce Hashira's glare softened, cracked by the overwhelming, disorienting flood of emotion. He was suddenly just Izuku again, a 14-year-old boy, standing before a very pretty girl, having just done something completely insane. He reached out a hand, his movements stiff and awkward. The rubble. She looked down at her trapped leg as if just remembering it. He easily lifted the concrete slab, his wiry muscles straining but holding, and tossed it aside. He offered his hand again to help her up. She took it. The moment their skin touched, the spark flared into a bonfire. A wave of dizziness washed over both of them, a phantom sensation of a shared memory that neither could grasp. It was the feeling of holding this same hand under a moonlit sky, of blood and bandages and whispered promises. The blaring horn sounded, signaling the end of the exam. The tension broke. Izuku immediately dropped her hand as if it were burning, a faint blush creeping up his neck. The cold, controlled warrior was gone, replaced by a flustered teenager completely out of his depth. "Ah, you should get to the nurse," he managed to say, his voice losing its steady cadence. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his posture rigid. He needed to be alone. He needed to process the cataclysm that had just detonated in his soul. He had looked at a stranger, and seen the reason for his entire existence. Ochako Uraraka watched him go, one hand clutching the wrist he had just held. Her heart was hammering in her chest for reasons that had nothing to do with the giant robot. She didn't know his name, But she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that she would never forget those mismatched, fiercely protective eyes. The acceptance letter from Yue arrived on a Tuesday. It was a simple, unassuming envelope, yet it held the weight of a life's dream. Izuku sat at his desk, staring at it, his hands perfectly still. His mother, Inko, was practically vibrating with nervous energy behind him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Well?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Aren't you going to open it?" Izuku took a slow, deliberate breath. This was not the culmination of his journey. It was the first step onto a much longer, more dangerous path. Iguro's soul did not revel in intermediate victories. It assessed them, filed them away, and prepared for the next battle. He picked up a letter opener and slit the envelope with surgical precision. A small metal disc slid out, clattering onto his desk. It lit up, and a hologram of All Might flickered to life, projecting into the center of the room. "I am here as a projection!" the hero boomed, making Inko jump. Izuku simply watched, his expression unreadable. All Might, in his full, heroic glory, began with a flourish about Yue's grading system. He moved with the grandiloquent gestures of a showman, but his eyes, even in the hologram, seemed fixed on Izuku. "Young Midoriya, your performance on the written exam was exemplary. Top marks. A truly heroic mind at work," he declared. "But as you know, that is only half the battle. In the practical exam, your final score was..." A holographic screen appeared beside All Might, showing a large, bold number. 0. Inko let out a small, strangled gasp. Izuku's face remained a placid mask. "A grand total of 0 villain points," All Might continued, the dramatic pause hanging in the air. "Ordinarily, that would mean a failing grade. A dream cut short. However," the screen changed. Videos began to play, grainy, security camera footage from the battle center. It showed Izuku disabling robots to save the girl with the purple hair. It showed him leading the three-pointer away from the boy trapped by sticky balls. It showed him, again and again, intervening, protecting, and saving. "There is another, hidden metric to our exam. A panel of judges watches every moment, looking for something more than just destructive power. We look for character, for courage, for the spirit of self-sacrifice. We look for heroism." The screen now focused on the final moments of the exam. It showed Ochako trapped. It showed the zero-pointer, a titan of destruction, and then it showed Izuku, a green blur of impossible speed and grace, dismantling the colossal machine not with brute force, but with a terrifying, beautiful efficiency. To leap into danger to save a stranger, with no thought for points or personal gain, that is the heart of a true hero. And for that, the judges have awarded you 60 rescue points. The screen flashed again. Villain points 0, rescue points 60. Total 60. A passing grade. "Welcome, young Midoriya," All Might said, his holographic smile seeming to soften, to become the genuine smile of Toshinori Yagi. "Your journey is just beginning. Yue is your hero academia." The hologram fizzled out. The room was silent for a moment, and then Inko burst into tears, rushing forward to wrap her son in a bone-crushing hug. "Izuku! Oh, Izuku, I'm so proud of you! You did it!" Izuku gently patted her back, a strange sense of detachment coloring the moment. He felt relief, a quiet satisfaction that his strategy, or rather, his instinct, had been validated, but joy felt like a foreign concept. He looked at the blank disk on his desk. He had passed. He was in. He was one step closer to fulfilling a vow made in another life, a promise to a girl whose face he now saw every time he closed his eyes. That was all that mattered. The door to Class 1A was obnoxiously large. Izuku paused before it, his hand resting on the cool metal. Kabaramaru shifted on his shoulders, his tongue flicking out to taste the air of this new environment. It smelled of floor polish, nervous sweat, and a cacophony of unfamiliar quirks. It smelled like a nest of vipers, each one with its own unique venom. Assess. Adapt. Survive. The voice of Iguro was a low hiss in the back of his mind. He slid the door open and stepped inside. The classroom was already buzzing with a low hum of activity. His eyes, one turquoise, one yellow, did a quick, sweeping scan of the room, cataloging the occupants. He saw the rigid, imposing form of Tenya Ida, the boy from the orientation. He was currently chastising another student for having his feet on the desk. That student was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo's head snapped up the moment Izuku entered. Their eyes met across the room. Bakugo's were filled with a simmering, volcanic rage. Izuku's were utterly placid, offering no purchase for the anger, like a deep, still pond. He gave a minuscule, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement, and then broke eye contact, dismissing Bakugo as a known, albeit volatile, variable. This silent dismissal seemed to infuriate Bakugo more than any overt challenge ever could. Izuku found his assigned seat, number 18, near the back by the window. It was the perfect tactical position, offering a clear view of the entire room and an accessible exit. He sat down, his movements economical and silent, and placed his bag beside his desk. He was a stone dropped into a river, causing a few ripples of curiosity before the current of conversation simply flowed around him. "Hey! It's you!" The voice was bright, cheerful, and dangerously close. Izuku tensed, turning his head. It was the girl from the exam. The girl with the brown hair and the warm, kind eyes. She was beaming at him, her cheeks slightly flushed. "From the entrance exam! That was amazing! The way you took down that giant robot, it was like whoosh and bam! I tried to talk to Present Mike to give you some of my points, but he said I didn't need to." Her presence was a physical force. It was like standing too close to a bonfire, warm and inviting, but so intense it threatened to burn through his carefully constructed defenses. The phantom scent of wisteria and cherry blossoms bloomed in his mind, and his heart hammered against his ribs with a painful, unfamiliar rhythm. "Thank you for saving me back there," she continued, oblivious to his internal turmoil. "I'm Uraraka Ochako." He stared at her for a moment too long, his analytical mind completely short-circuiting. The cold, calculating warrior was gone, replaced by a flustered boy who had no idea how to interact with the living embodiment of his soul's deepest longing. "Midoriya. Izuku," he managed to say, his voice quieter than usual. Kabaramaru, who was usually wary of everyone, uncoiled slightly and lifted his head, observing Ochako with curious, unblinking red eyes. "Oh, and this is Kabaramaru," Izuku added, his hand reflexively touching the snake's smooth scales. Ochako's eyes widened, but not with fear. With delight. "Wow! He's beautiful! Is he part of your quirk?" Before Izuku could answer, a new voice cut in, low and monotone. "If you're here to make friends, you should leave." A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade was lying on the floor behind Ochako in a yellow sleeping bag. He looked, Izuku noted with a detached sort of alarm, like a giant, jaundiced caterpillar. The man unzipped his sleeping bag, stood up, and took a long sip from a juice pouch. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work," he said, his tired, bloodshot eyes sweeping over the class. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." He pulled a gym uniform out of his sleeping bag. "Put these on and meet me on the field. We're having a quirk apprehension test." The locker room was a noisy, chaotic mess of testosterone and bravado. Izuku found a corner, and changed quickly and silently, his movements so efficient he was finished before most boys had even taken their shirts off. He ignored the stares directed at his wiry, deceptively lean physique and the pale, latticework of scars that crisscrossed his back and shoulders, faint, silvery lines that he had no memory of receiving. On the field, Aizawa's tired voice cut through the excited chatter. "Bakugo, you placed first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo stepped into the circle, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a deafening explosion, launched the ball into the sky. "Dii!" he screamed. The ball was a speck in the clouds. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excitement. "This looks so fun!" a girl with pink skin exclaimed. Aizawa's expression soured. A cruel, thin smile stretched across his face. "Fun, you say? You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be fun and games? How about this? The student who ranks last in total points will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately. The threat settled over the class like a shroud, choking the excitement out of the air. Izuku felt nothing. The logic was sound. Culling the weak was the most efficient way to strengthen the herd. It was a philosophy Iguro Obanai would have heartily endorsed. This teacher, Aizawa, was far more interesting than he had first appeared. The tests began. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against a boy with a tail. He ignored his opponent, focusing inward. He dropped into a low, 4-point stance that looked more like a predator's crouch than a sprinter's start. He took a single, deep breath, feeling the power of total concentration flood his muscles. The starting pistol fired. He didn't explode off the line like Bakugo or Ida. He uncoiled. His body moved like a whip cracking, a single, fluid transfer of energy from his toes to his fingertips. He covered the 50 meters in 5.49 seconds. It wasn't a record-breaking time, but his form was flawless, with zero wasted motion. Aizawa's tired eyes lingered on him for a fraction of a second longer than on the others. Test 2, grip strength. Here, he faltered. His strength was not in static, crushing power. It was in speed, flexibility, and the tensile power of his breathing-enhanced muscles. The dynamometer gave him a reading of 58 kilograms, pathetically average. He saw a boy with multiple arms register a score over 500. A logical weakness. He filed it away. Test 3, standing long jump. He cleared the sandbox entirely, his body twisting in the air with the grace of a gymnast, landing silently on the grass beyond. Flexibility and explosive leg power were his forte. Test 4, repeated side steps. This was his stage. While others awkwardly shuffled or used their quirks in clumsy ways, Izuku became a blur. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground. His hips and torso swiveled with a liquid grace, his body weaving back and forth like a serpent dancing to a silent rhythm. He didn't just score high, he set the top score for the class, moving with a hypnotic efficiency that was both beautiful and deeply unnerving to watch. More than a few of his classmates stared, their mouths slightly agape. They had seen quirks that granted speed, but this was different. This was pure, unadulterated skill. Aizawa's gaze was now fixed on him. The file had said, enhanced flexibility. That was a gross understatement. This was biomechanical perfection. Finally, it was Izuku's turn for the ball throw. He stepped into the circle, the familiar weight of the softball feeling alien in his hand compared to the hilt of his bakken. The class watched with mild interest. After his poor showing in the grip strength test, they didn't expect much. He closed his eyes. He ignored the whispers, the sky, the world. He focused on his breath. Deeper this time. He wasn't just oxygenating his muscles. He was stoking the furnace in his core, drawing on a well of power that felt ancient and vast. He could feel kabaramaru on his shoulders, perfectly still, his small body mirroring Izuku's own focused calm. This is not a test of arm strength, Iguro's voice instructed. It is a test of energy transference. The arm is merely the final link in the chain. His body began to move. He didn't wind up like a pitcher. He began to rotate, his feet anchored to the ground. He started slowly, his hips and torso twisting, his breathing a powerful, audible hiss. The rotation accelerated, his body becoming a tightly controlled vortex of energy. He wasn't just spinning his arm. He was channeling the kinetic force from the ground, up through his legs, amplified by the torque of his core, and funneling it all into his shoulder. He visualized the motion, the perfect, undulating arc of his most practiced form. First form, winding serpent slash. At the peak of his rotation, his eyes snapped open. The turquoise and yellow burned with a focused intensity. He released the ball. There was no explosion, no flash of light. There was only a sound, a sharp crack like a bullwhip, as the ball broke the sound barrier an instant after leaving his hand. It didn't fly in a simple parabola. It seemed to corkscrew through the air, a white speck that vanished into the azure sky with impossible velocity. Silence. The entire class was staring, dumbfounded. Bakugo's jaw was literally hanging open. That throw, it hadn't come from Izuku's arm. It had come from his entire being. Aizawa looked at the device in his hand, his perpetually bored expression finally cracking, replaced by one of genuine, critical intrigue. He held it up for the class to see. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo by 1/10 of a meter. A wave of disbelief washed over the students. "No way!" a boy with yellow hair and a black lightning bolt exclaimed. "How did he do that? His quirk is just being flexible and having a pet snake." Izuku simply stepped out of the circle, his breathing already returning to normal. He ignored the stares and the whispers. The result was logical. He had used a superior technique. That was all, but Aizawa knew better. He surreptitiously pulled up Izuku Midoriya's file on his personal datapad. Name, Izuku Midoriya. Quirk, Serpentine. Description, user possesses a highly flexible spinal column and a symbiotic relationship with a white snake. Minor agility enhancements noted. Aizawa looked from the insultingly brief file to the boy standing calmly at the edge of the field. He saw the way Midoriya stood, perfectly balanced, his energy conserved. He saw the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, assessing everyone and everything. He saw the subtle, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, a breathing pattern he'd only ever seen in a few underground martial arts masters. This isn't a quirk, Aizawa thought, a thrill of professional curiosity cutting through his usual apathy. This is a discipline. The flexibility is a physical trait, a beneficial one, but it's not the source of his power. The snake moves in sync with him. It watched the ball's trajectory. It's a partner, a spotter, a second set of senses. But the real engine is the breathing. He's using some kind of esoteric respiratory technique to temporarily boost his physical output to superhuman levels. The rotation for the throw was a martial arts form, not a random spin. Every single movement this kid makes is precise, practiced, and purposeful. He looked into Midoriya's mismatched eyes and saw something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He saw the cold, weary calm of a veteran. There was no youthful arrogance, no fear, no excitement. There was just stillness. The stillness of a predator that knows, with absolute certainty, that it is the most dangerous thing in the vicinity. This kid, Aizawa concluded, a thin, predatory smile gracing his own lips for the first time that day, is either the most talented prodigy I have ever seen, or he is something far, far more dangerous. This is going to be interesting. When the final results were posted, Izuku ranked 5th. His stellar performance in the agility tests and the ball throw had balanced out his average scores in the pure strength events. The student ranked last, a short, purple-haired boy named Mineta, burst into tears, only for Aizawa to reveal the expulsion was a logical ruse to push them to do their best. As the class was dismissed to change, a palpable sense of relief washed over them. They began to chat, to congratulate each other, to form the first tentative bonds of friendship. Izuku remained apart from it all, a silent observer on the periphery. "Dude, that ball throw was insane!" called out the electric quirk user, Kaminari Denki, clapping a red-haired, spiky-haired boy on the back. "And your hardening was so manly, Kirishima. Thanks, man. But my form was a little sloppy on the side steps." Kirishima Iguro replied, grinning. "Your center of gravity was too high," Izuku stated, his voice flat. He hadn't intended to speak aloud. The observation had simply surfaced, a reflexive critique from a mind hardwired to see flaws. Kirishima and Kaminari froze, turning to look at him. "What?" Kirishima asked, his good-natured smile faltering. "On the side steps," Izuku elaborated, his tone analytical, not malicious. "You rely on the durability of your quirk, so your defensive posture is lazy. You keep your weight on your heels and your torso too upright. A skilled opponent would simply bypass your guard and sweep your legs. Your hardness is useless if you're on your back." He then turned his gaze to Kaminari. "And you? Your indiscriminate discharge of electricity during the dash was inefficient. You wasted 80% of your energy electrifying the air around you instead of channeling it into your muscles for linear propulsion." It was a flashy but ultimately pathetic display of power management. The two boys stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and offense. The area around them went dead silent. Other students who had overheard turned to look, their expressions ranging from confused to hostile. Mina Ishido, the cheerful pink girl, bounced over, her hands on her hips. Hey! That's not very nice! They were just having fun! Izuku looked at her, his head tilted in genuine confusion. The social context of the situation was completely lost on him. Iguro Obanai had never learned pleasantries. He had learned to critique, to analyze, to find weakness, because his life and the lives of his comrades had depended on it. It was not a critique of their character, Izuku said calmly. It was an observation of their tactical deficiencies. Acknowledging a flaw is the first step to correcting it. Is that not the purpose of this academy? His cold, logical explanation was so utterly devoid of social grace that it only made things worse. He sounded arrogant, condescending. A wall of ice formed between him and the rest of the class. They saw him as a judgmental, arrogant jerk who thought he was better than everyone else. He simply saw himself as stating facts. He realized his words had not been received as intended. A flicker of something, frustration? Loneliness, passed through him. He turned away without another word and headed for the locker room, the invisible wall solidifying behind him. As he walked away, his path briefly intersected with that of the silent, two-toned boy, Shoto Todoroki. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. Todoroki's gaze was a storm of ice and fire, a maelstrom of barely contained rage and deep-seated pain. Izuku's gaze was a calm, fathomless abyss. In that instant, a silent, profound understanding passed between them. The soul of Iguro Obanai, a being forged in the crucible of unimaginable childhood trauma, looked at Shoto Todoroki and saw the same brand of hell seared into his soul. He saw a boy who had been treated not as a son, but as a tool, a weapon to be honed against an unseen enemy. He recognized the suffocating weight of a parent's ambition, the scars that no one else could see. Todoroki, in turn, looked into Izuku's mismatched eyes and saw something he couldn't define. It wasn't the look of a normal teenager. It was something ancient, something weary, something that recognized his own pain without judgment or pity. It was like looking at a fractured mirror. They passed each other without a word, but a connection had been made, a thread of shared darkness that bound them in a way no cheerful conversation ever could. The day ended. Izuku walked home alone, the chatter and laughter of his new classmates a distant sound he was not a part of. He had proven his worth. He had established his presence, and he had successfully alienated nearly everyone in a single afternoon. It was, Iguro's soul decided, a productive first day. He was so lost in his own thoughts that he didn't notice the light, quick footsteps behind him until she was right beside him. Midoriya-kun! He stopped, turning. It was Ochako. She was smiling, though it seemed a little hesitant now. I wanted to say good job today, she said, her hands clasped behind her back. You were really amazing. His carefully constructed composure crumbled again. The cold analyst vanished, replaced by the awkward boy. Thank you, Uraraka-san. You were also proficient. She giggled at his stilted choice of words. Thanks. Hey, I never really got to thank you properly for, you know. She gestured vaguely, indicating the memory of the giant robot. You were so cool back there, and so intense. She looked at him, and he found himself unable to look away. He was watching her with that same fierce, possessive gaze from the exam. It was an unnerving look, one that seemed to pierce right through her, to see something deep inside her soul. It wasn't predatory or creepy. It was protective. Overwhelmingly so. It made her feel like the most important person in the world, and it sent a flutter of nervous butterflies through her stomach. I owed you a debt, he said, the words coming from a place deeper than his own consciousness. A debt? What do you mean? We'd never met, she asked, confused. He didn't answer. He just kept looking at her, and his internal monologue was a silent roar. This is it. This is why I'm here. Not for glory, not to be a hero, but for this. To build a world where she can smile without fear. The vow is renewed. I have to go, he said abruptly, turning and walking away, his pace faster than before. Ochako watched him go, a pensive look on her face. Her classmates thought he was cold and arrogant. But she had seen something else. She had seen the boy who ran towards a monster to save a stranger, and she had felt the weight of his gaze, a gaze that promised to shield her from all the horrors of the world. He was a puzzle, a contradiction of cold logic and burning intensity, and she found, to her own surprise, that she very much wanted to solve him. The second day of classes at UE began with a schedule that was deceptively normal: English with present Mike, a subject Izuku excelled at due to his analytical mind's ability to deconstruct grammar and syntax. Then came modern hero art history with Midnight, a class that Iguro's soul found utterly frivolous, but which Izuku meticulously took notes for. The afternoon, however, was what everyone was waiting for. The schedule simply read: Foundational Heroics. The classroom door slammed open with a theatrical flourish, revealing the towering, grinning form of All Might. "I am here! Coming through the door like a normal person!" A wave of awed whispers and excited gasps swept through the class. Kirishima pumped his fist. "Whoa! It's really him!" Kaminari's eyes were wide. "So he is a teacher here! This is gonna be awesome!" Izuku's reaction was more complex. The fanboy heart of Izuku Midoriya fluttered with a familiar, starstruck awe, but the pragmatic soul of Iguro Obanai saw only the imposing figure of his mentor, Toshinori Yagi, wearing his public face. He noted the slight strain in the smile, the almost imperceptible rigidity in his posture that betrayed the constant pain from his injury. It was a masterful performance, but a performance nonetheless. All Might marched to the podium, his movements grand and exaggerated. "Foundational Heroics. For this class, we will be building up your hero foundation through various trials. Let's jump right in with this. The trial of battle." He gestured dramatically to the wall, where numbered cases slid out with a smooth, mechanical hiss. "And to go with your first battle, we had these made based on your quirk registration forms and the requests you sent in. Your battle costumes." The class erupted in a unified cheer. The promise of custom-made costumes and a sanctioned battle was an intoxicating combination. As the students scrambled to grab their cases, Izuku walked calmly to his, number 18. He had spent weeks designing his costume, every element chosen for function over form. It was a rejection of the flashy, colorful heroics All Might represented, and a full embrace of the silent, efficient warrior he was becoming. His costume was a study in subdued, practical lethality. It was a dark, forest green bodysuit made of a reinforced, tear-resistant fabric that allowed for maximum flexibility. Over this, he wore a black, high-collared haori, its sleeves cut short at the elbow to avoid impeding his movements. His lower face was covered by a black mask, similar in style to the bandages Iguro had worn, made of a filter fabric that could help with smoke or mild toxins. His hands were covered in fingerless black gloves with weighted knuckles. Strapped to his back, in a custom-made scabbard, was his reinforced baken. The only flash of color was the pure white of Kabaramaru, who was nestled comfortably in the space between the scabbard and his neck, his crimson eyes surveying the world. Izuku looked less like a hero in training and more like a shinobi from a bygone era. When the class reassembled in the tunnel leading to Ground Beta, the change in atmosphere was palpable. They were no longer students in a classroom. They were heroes, each one a unique silhouette of power and potential. Ida looked like a medieval knight had been redesigned by a race car engineer. Bakugo's costume, with its grenade-shaped gauntlets, was an unsubtle declaration of his explosive power. And then there was Ochako. She wore a sleek, form-fitting pink and black bodysuit with thick, rounded boots and bracers. A clear visor was perched on her head. She looked cute. The word popped into Izuku's head, unbidden and unwelcome. She caught him looking and gave him a cheerful wave, her cheeks turning a slightly brighter shade of pink. "Wow, Midoriya-kun! Your costume is so cool! Very mysterious!" she said, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Izuku felt the familiar heat rise in his neck. He averted his gaze, giving a curt nod. "Yours is practical for zero-gravity environments. The enlarged footwear provides a stable anchor point." Ochako blinked at the technical, almost clinical assessment. "Oh. Yeah? I guess so. I just tried not to make it too puffy. I get bloated," she admitted with a sheepish laugh. Before he could formulate an equally awkward response, All Might's booming voice called them to attention. He explained the exercise, a 2-on-2 indoor battle. One team would be the villains, guarding a nuclear weapon prop. The other team, the heroes, would have to either capture the villains with capture tape or secure the weapon within the time limit. Now, let's draw lots to decide the teams, All Might announced, holding up a box. The students drew their lots. Izuku watched as the teams formed, his mind already running calculations, assessing potential matchups and synergies. He saw Bakugo paired with Ida, a powerful, if volatile, combination. He saw Todoroki paired with a boy who had a six-armed quirk. A team built on overwhelming force. He looked down at his own lot. Team A. He scanned the room, looking for his partner. Looks like we're a team, Midoriya-kun. He turned. It was Ochako. She was holding a small ball with the letter on it, a bright, hopeful smile on her face. Izuku's mind went blank for a full 3 seconds. The universe, it seemed, was not subtle. Fate was a sledgehammer. He was being paired with the one person who could completely dismantle his cold, logical composure. Igiro's soul roared in his mind, a chaotic mix of primal protectiveness and abject terror. Protect her. Don't let her get hurt. Don't let her see the monster you are. Don't mess this up. And your first opponents will be. All Might reached into 2 boxes, one labeled hero and one villain. These guys! Team A will be the heroes. And Team D will be the villains. A heavy silence fell over the group. Team D, Bakugo and Ida. Izuku looked over at Bakugo. The explosive blonde was staring at him, a wide, predatory grin stretching his face. It was the look of a wolf that had just cornered its favorite prey. This wasn't a training exercise for Bakugo. This was a hunt. A reckoning. Ochako's smile faltered. Oh wow. Bakugo-kun, he seems to really have it in for you, doesn't he? She murmured, a note of genuine concern in her voice. Izuku's gaze hardened. The flustered boy vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating warrior. The personal animosity was irrelevant. Bakugo was an obstacle. An emotional, predictable, and therefore exploitable obstacle. It's fine, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. He turned to Ochako, his mismatched eyes boring into hers. We need a strategy. All Might led the 2 teams to the designated building, a 5-story concrete shell designed for urban combat simulation. As Ida and Bakugo went inside to prepare, All Might gave Izuku and Ochako a floor plan and a small earpiece for communication. You have 5 minutes until the infiltration begins. As soon as they were alone, Ochako turned to Izuku, a determined look on her face. Okay, so what's the plan? Bakugo-kun will probably come right for you, right? And Ida-kun is super fast. They'll probably have him guarding the weapon. Izuku was already a step ahead, his eyes scanning the blueprints, his mind a whirlwind of tactical analysis. He barely seemed to register her words. Ida is a liability in close quarters. His quirk requires a straight line to build up speed. The building is full of tight corridors and blind corners. He will be a defensive player, a mobile sentry. His rigid personality means he will take his role as villain seriously. He will not leave the objective. He traced a line on the map with his finger. Bakugo is the rover. He is the attack dog. But he is not just an attack dog. He is a bloodhound, and his target is me. He won't care about the objective. He won't care about you. He will only care about crushing me. His pride demands it. Ochako was taken aback by the cold, brutal accuracy of his assessment. He had dissected their opponents' personalities and abilities in a matter of seconds. So, how do we beat them? She asked, her voice now a little softer, a little more deferential. Izuku finally looked up from the map, his gaze intense. We will not beat them. We will dismantle them. You and I, Uraraka-san, our quirks have a natural synergy. I am a ground-based, high-mobility precision striker. You control gravity. You are a battlefield manipulator. Together, we are tandem fangs of a single serpent. The imagery was so vivid, so potent, that Ochako felt a shiver run down her spine. He wasn't just talking about a school exercise anymore. He pointed to a spot on the 4th floor. The weapon will be here. It's the most defensible room on the upper floors. Ida will be there. You are the only one who can handle him. Me? But he's so fast. His speed is irrelevant if his feet cannot find purchase on the ground. Izuku stated simply. I need you to be the rock. The anchor. While I am the serpent, the distraction. He then began to speak in a series of quiet, clipped sentences, his voice a low hiss of command. He gave her hand signals, a closed fist for wait, 2 fingers pointed for move, a flat palm for use quirk. He made a soft, clicking sound with his tongue. If you hear this, it means an ambush is imminent. Find cover. He emitted a low, almost inaudible hiss. This means I am engaging. Stay clear. It was a language of battle, created on the spot, and the strangest part was that Ochako understood it perfectly. It was as if some part of her brain already knew these signals, as if they were recalling a long-forgotten skill. The plan is simple, Izuku concluded, his eyes locking with hers. I will draw the hound. You will sneak past the chaos and secure the objective. But you must be silent. You must be a ghost. Can you do that? Ochako looked into his mismatched eyes, saw the absolute, unwavering confidence he had in her, and felt a surge of her own determination. He wasn't treating her like a sidekick, or a damsel in distress. He was treating her like an equal, a fellow warrior. She squared her shoulders and gave a firm nod. I can, the buzzer sounded. The trial had begun. They entered the building through a ground-floor window, their movements synchronized and silent. Izuku moved in a low crouch, his bakken held in a reverse grip, its tip pointed behind him. Ochako followed a few paces back, her steps light, her eyes scanning their surroundings. The interior of the building was a labyrinth of gray corridors and empty rooms, a perfect hunting ground. They moved up the first flight of stairs. The air was thick with tension. Kabaramaru's head was raised, his tongue flicking in and out, tasting the air, searching for the telltale scent of nitroglycerin sweat. Suddenly Izuku stopped. He held up a closed fist. Ochako froze instantly. He made the soft, clicking sound with his tongue. She pressed herself flat against the wall behind a concrete pillar, just as Izuku had instructed. A split second later, the wall at the end of the corridor exploded. Bakugo came flying through the cloud of smoke and debris, his face a mask of feral glee, his right hand already sparking. DKU! I found you, you coward! But his target wasn't there. Izuku had already moved, a blur of green and black that flowed to the side the instant before the explosion. Bakugo's charge carried him past Izuku's position, leaving his back exposed for a critical moment. Izuku didn't waste it. He lunged forward, not with his sword, but with his body. He slammed his shoulder into the back of Bakugo's knee, a precise strike designed to buckle the joint. At the same time, he hooked his foot around Bakugo's other ankle. It was a perfect, non-lethal reaping throw. Bakugo, for all his power, was caught completely off guard. He stumbled, his balance shattered, and went down hard, his armor clattering against the concrete floor. Before he could even register what had happened, Izuku had already disengaged, melting back into the shadows of the corridor. Is that all you have, Kaken? Izuku's voice echoed from the darkness, cold and mocking. A predictable frontal assault? You really haven't learned anything. The taunt was a calculated strike, aimed not at Bakugo's body, but at his pride. The effect was immediate. Bakugo roared, a sound of pure, undiluted fury, and scrambled to his feet. His eyes were wild, scanning the corridor for any sign of movement. Show yourself and fight me, you damn snake! Izuku emitted a low hiss. It was the signal. I am engaging. From her hiding spot, Ochako saw her opening. While Bakugo's attention was completely, obsessively fixed on finding Izuku, the path to the upper floors was clear. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and began to move, her footsteps as silent as a whisper. She was the ghost. The cat-and-mouse game began. Izuku led Bakugo on a chase through the winding corridors of the second and third floors. It wasn't a retreat, it was a carefully orchestrated tactical withdrawal. He never stayed in one place for more than a few seconds. He would appear at the end of a hallway, offer a cutting remark about Bakugo's technique, and then vanish before the retaliatory explosion could even reach him. Your blasts are too wide-angle. You're sacrificing concussive force for area of effect. A child's tactic! Boom! The wall where Izuku had been standing was pulverized. You're relying on your right hand for your bigger explosions. Are you nursing an injury in your left shoulder, or are you just poorly trained? Crack boom! A volley of smaller explosions peppered the ceiling as Bakugo raged. In the observation room, the other students watched in stunned silence. All Might gripped the railing, his perpetual smile gone, replaced by an expression of intense concentration. Wow! Kirishima murmured. Midoriya is totally running circles around Bakugo without even throwing a punch. He is not running. A new voice, deep and feminine, spoke up from the back. It was Momo Yayorozu, the recommended student. He is dictating the flow of the entire battle. He is using Bakugo's own rage as a weapon, forcing him to expend energy and destroy the environment, limiting his own mobility. It's brilliant, Todoroki, who had been watching with a detached expression, found his eyes narrowed in focus. He saw what Yayorozu saw. This wasn't a fight. It was a dissection. Midoriya was taking Bakugo apart, piece by agonizing piece. Meanwhile, Ochako had reached the 4th floor. She moved with a stealth she didn't know she possessed, pressing herself into alcoves, using the sounds of Bakugo's distant explosions to mask the sound of her own movements. She found the target room. Peeking around the corner, she saw the large, fake nuclear weapon in the center of the room, and standing before it, his posture rigid and his arms crossed, was Tenya Ida. He was muttering to himself, fully embracing his villainous role. Heh heh heh, the heroes will never get past my impenetrable defenses. Ochako suppressed a giggle. He was taking this way too seriously. She ducked back behind the wall, her mind racing. Ida was fast. If she made a run for the weapon, he would intercept her in an instant. She needed a distraction. She needed a trap. Her eyes fell on the debris littering the corridor, a result of Bakugo's rampage. An idea, bold and a little crazy, began to form. She began to gather smaller chunks of concrete, her movements swift and silent. Down on the 3rd floor, the serpent was beginning to tire the hound. Bakugo was panting, his movements growing sloppier, his explosions more erratic. He was a force of nature, but even a hurricane eventually runs out of steam. Izuku, on the other hand, was a model of efficiency. His breathing was deep and steady, his movements economical. He was leading Bakugo into a larger, more open room, one he had noted on the blueprints. It was time to spring the trap. Getting tired, Kaken? Izuku's voice taunted from the center of the room. This time, he didn't run. He stood his ground, his bakken held loosely in one hand. Bakugo saw his chance. His face split into a triumphant, savage grin. Finally decided to stop running, you damn coward? He raised his grenade-like gauntlet, a small pin clicking near the handle. You know what these are, Deku? My gauntlets store my nitroglycerin sweat. And this one's full. In the observation room, All Might's eyes widened in alarm. Young Bakugo, don't! You'll kill him! He yelled into the comms. He'll be fine if he dodges. Bakugo screamed back, and pulled the pin. A blinding jet of fire and concussive force erupted from the gauntlet, a focused explosion far larger than anything he had produced before. It tore through the room, a wave of destruction that ripped the floor panels from their moorings and shattered the windows. The students in the observation room cried out in shock. The sheer power was terrifying, but when the smoke cleared, Izuku was unharmed. He was pressed flat against the far wall, having used the explosion's initial shockwave as a smokescreen to propel himself out of the main blast radius. He was scorched and his ears were ringing, but he was intact. However, the blast had done exactly what Izuku had anticipated. It had blown a massive hole in the floor, creating a gaping chasm that led directly down to the 2nd story. He now stood on one side, Bakugo on the other. A powerful quirk, Izuku said, his voice dangerously calm. But you have no control. You are not a swordsman with a blade. You are a child with a bomb. He took a fighting stance, his bakken now held in a two-handed grip. Come on, Kaken. Let's end this. Bakugo, incensed beyond reason, took the bait. He launched himself across the chasm with his explosions, a human missile aimed directly at Izuku. This was the moment Izuku had been waiting for. He met Bakugo's charge not with force, but with fluidity. The moment Bakugo was within range, Izuku's body moved in a blur. First form, winding serpent slash. He didn't aim for Bakugo, he aimed for the capture tape. His Bakken moved in a serpentine arc, faster than the eye could follow. It snaked around Bakugo's explosive charge, and with a flick of his wrist, he wrapped the capture tape securely around Bakugo's ankle. With the same motion, he used the flat of the blade to slap Bakugo's extended arm, redirecting his trajectory just enough. Bakugo soared past him, his attack missing completely. Izuku, using Bakugo's own momentum against him, pulled sharply on the capture tape, anchoring it to a nearby support pillar. Bakugo was now tied to the building, suspended over the chasm. He was captured. The entire exchange had taken less than 2 seconds. At that exact moment, on the floor above, Ochako made her move. Ida, hearing the colossal explosion from below, was momentarily distracted, his head turning towards the sound. Now! Ochako whispered to herself. She touched her fingertips to the pile of debris she had collected, making it all zero gravity. Then, with a powerful swing, she batted the floating cloud of rubble into the room with a discarded piece of rebar. Meteor storm! She yelled, channeling her inner hero. Ida turned back just in time to see a shower of weightless concrete chunks, large and small, floating towards him. His instincts took over. He began to dodge, his incredible speed allowing him to weave between the floating projectiles. Heh! You think such a foolish attack can stop me? But it was a feint. While he was busy dodging the meteors, Ochako, having made herself weightless, launched herself over the top of the debris cloud. She sailed through the air, unseen, her body aimed directly at the nuclear weapon. She landed, wrapping her arms around the massive prop. Secured! She yelled, her voice filled with triumph. A loud buzzer echoed through the building. Hero team! Why-ins! The silence in the observation room was absolute. Then it broke. Holy crap! Kaminari breathed. That was a perfect victory, Yaoyorozu said, her voice filled with analytical awe. They completely outmaneuvered them at every turn. Midoriya neutralized Bakugo by exploiting his personality, and Uraraka used a brilliant feint to bypass Ida's speed. Their synergy was flawless. All Might let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He looked at the screen showing the 2 members of Team A. He had offered Izuku mentorship to temper the boy's terrifying efficiency, to teach him the heart of a hero. But what he had just witnessed was something more. He hadn't just seen a warrior, he had seen a leader. A strategist who could not only control himself, but could elevate his partner, creating a team that was far greater than the sum of its parts. Down in the building, Izuku helped a sputtering, furious Bakugo back onto solid ground. The fight was over, the adrenaline was fading, and the familiar, bone-deep exhaustion was setting in. Ochako came running down the stairs, her face flushed with excitement. We did it, Midoriya-kun! Your plan was perfect! She stopped in front of him, her eyes shining. In that moment, a strange, unspoken energy passed between them. They had not just won a training exercise. They had fought as one. He had trusted her completely, and she had delivered. Iguro's soul, which had never known true partnership outside of the Hashira, felt a flicker of something warm and unfamiliar. Izuku's heart, which had always been so lonely, felt a sense of connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He found himself giving her a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was the first genuine smile anyone in Class 1A had ever seen from him. We did it, Uraraka-san, he corrected softly. The fangs of the serpent strike as one.